Imagine walking into a lawyer's office and finding out your entire inheritance is just $1. Everyone around you laughs, mocking you, as if your life amounts to nothing more than a single bill. But what if that dollar carried a secret powerful enough to shake an entire empire and expose truths no one ever dared to face? If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. A quiet man named Samir walked into a lawyer's office, holding the small hand of his 7-year-old daughter, Leela. The room was filled with polished wood tables, tall stacks of legal papers, and the low murmurs of his siblings. They looked at him with smirks, already convinced of their importance. Today was the reading of their late father's will, and everyone waited for their share. Samir had never expected much. Life had never been generous to him. While his siblings, Brent and Nora, enjoyed private schools and inherited positions in the family business, Samir had chosen a different road. He worked long shifts at a hardware shop, often leaving with tired shoulders, but always carrying home a smile for Leela. Since his wife had passed away during childbirth, Samir lived for one purpose only: to protect and nurture his daughter. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the thick folder on the desk. One by one, he listed the gifts from the estate. Brent received several properties and valuable stock holdings. Nora was granted a sprawling house and control over a branch of the company. Their eyes glittered with satisfaction. Then, the lawyer paused, adjusted his glasses, and looked at Samir. To Samir, the lawyer read, a sealed envelope containing $1 United States dollar. The room fell silent for a brief moment. Then, the silence broke into laughter. Brent slapped the desk and leaned back in his chair, roaring with amusement. Nora covered her mouth, but could not hide her mocking grin. A whole $1, Brent sneered. Maybe you can buy a candy for your kid. Seems that's all you were worth to father. Samir lowered his eyes, feeling the heat of humiliation on his face. He squeezed Leela's hand gently, trying to shield her from the cruelty of their words. Inside, his heart ached, but his expression remained calm. He had faced struggles before, and this was only another test. The lawyer hand, it was thin, almost weightless. A single paper note rested inside. Samir nodded, whispered his thanks, and turned to leave, ignoring the chuckles and whispers behind him. That evening, in their modest kitchen, Samir placed the envelope on the worn wooden table. The room smelled faintly of stew, and Leela sat across from him, drawing on scraps of paper with colored pencils. She looked up and asked softly, "Daddy, why did Grandpa give you just $1?" Samir sighed. "I don't know. Leela, maybe he thought I didn't deserve more." Leela tilted her head and smiled with the innocence only a child can carry. "Maybe it's not just money. Maybe it's something special. Maybe Grandpa wanted you to find out." Her words echoed in his mind. Samir picked up the envelope again. He carefully slid out the dollar bill and held it under the warm kitchen light. As his eyes traced the edges, he noticed something faint, tiny handwriting scrawled along the margin. At first, it seemed like a smudge, but when he leaned closer, the words became clear. An address. His heart skipped a beat. He read it again and again to be sure. It was an old part of the city, a street he had never visited. The handwriting was familiar. It was his father's. Samir leaned back in his chair, the note trembling slightly in his hands. He thought of the years of silence between him and his father. He remembered the harsh words, the distance, and the feeling of being the forgotten son. And yet, here was a clue, something left behind only for him. Leela climbed onto his lap and looked at the bill with wide eyes. "See, Daddy," she whispered. "I told you it's special." Samir kissed her forehead and held her close. He no longer felt the sting of his siblings' laughter. Instead, he felt a strange pull, a sense that his father had given him more than what met the eye. That night, he could not sleep. He lay awake thinking about the address, about what could be waiting there, about why his father had hidden this secret in a single dollar. The more he thought, the more determined he became. The next morning, before the sun rose, Samir folded the bill carefully and placed it back into the envelope. He packed a small bag with snacks for Leela, and together they set out toward the old part of the city. Samir did not know what they would find, but he knew this journey was not about money. It was about something deeper, perhaps a final message from his father, or a chance to uncover truth buried under years of silence. And so, with quiet steps and a heart filled with questions, Samir walked beside his daughter, holding the envelope tightly. The laughter of his siblings faded in memory, replaced by the whisper of curiosity and the hope that a single dollar could carry more worth than anyone had imagined. The morning air was cool as Samir and Lila stepped off the bus. They stood at the edge of a forgotten part of the city, where old brick buildings leaned against one another, and weeds pushed through cracks in the pavement. The address written on the dollar bill had brought them here, to a narrow street lined with faded warehouses and rusted gates. Samir looked around carefully. Most of the buildings were abandoned, their windows boarded up or broken. Then his eyes caught the faded numbers on a weathered door. It matched the handwriting on the bill. Lila tugged his sleeve. "Is this it, Daddy?" Samir nodded slowly. "Yes, Lila, this is the place." The building was an old printing house, once alive with the sound of machines and workers, now silent and covered in dust. The heavy doors resisted as Samir pushed, but after a sharp creak, they opened just enough for them to step inside. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the roof, painting stripes across the dusty floor. The air was thick with the smell of age, as if the walls had held their breath for years. Lila's small footsteps echoed as she clutched Samir's hand. "It's so quiet," she whispered. Samir gave her a reassuring smile. Sometimes quiet places hide big secrets. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, they saw old printing machines left to rust, stacks of paper yellowed with time, and faded posters curled on the floor. Then, in a far corner, half covered by a torn cloth, stood a large metal trunk. Samir's heartbeat quickened. He brushed the cloth aside and touched the cool surface of the trunk. The lock was old, rusted, and brittle. With a firm pull, the latch snapped. Inside, layers of dust rose as he lifted the lid. What lay inside was not treasure in gold or jewels, but stacks of journals, thick folders, and sealed envelopes. Each one was marked with his father's handwriting. Samir picked up the first journal and opened it. The pages were filled with detailed notes, dates, and names. As his eyes scanned the words, his expression grew tense. The writing spoke of the company his siblings now controlled, Ardenworks. But these pages were not about success. They told of corruption, hidden deals, and stolen money. Employees were cheated of their wages. Suppliers lied to, and funds secretly moved into private accounts. Samir's chest tightened as he flipped through more pages. There were contracts signed under false pretenses, letters exchanged with dishonest partners, and clear evidence of fraud. He whispered, almost to himself, "Father knew. He knew everything." Leela looked up at him. "Is it bad, Daddy?" Samir placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's very serious, Leela. These papers, they show the truth." As he kept reading, Samir found something even more personal. Tucked inside one of the journals was a letter, folded and sealed with his father's initials. With trembling hands, he opened it. "To my son Samir," it began. "I know the world has treated you unfairly. I know your siblings saw you as weak, and I know I failed to show you the love you deserved. But I also know your heart. I leave this truth with you because only you will use it to protect others, not to destroy. Our name, our company, and the workers who depend on it deserve honesty. I trust you, my son, more than anyone else." Samir's eyes blurred with emotion as he read the words again. It was the first time in years he felt his father's voice speaking directly to him. He closed the letter gently and looked at the trunk again. These were not just papers. They were a burden, a responsibility, and perhaps a final gift of trust. Samir understood now why he had been given only a single dollar. It was not about wealth. It was about guiding him here, to this place, to discover the truth hidden in the shadows. He packed the journals and folders carefully into a bag. Lila, still holding his sleeve, looked at him with wide eyes. "What are you going to do, Daddy?" Samir bent down and smiled at her softly. "We are going to make things right." As they stepped out of the warehouse into the fading afternoon light, Samir felt a quiet strength building within him. The laughter of his siblings no longer mattered. What mattered now was the truth he carried in his hands and the future of the workers who had been betrayed. The hidden place had revealed more than Samir expected. It had given him answers, evidence, and a chance to honor his father's trust. It was the beginning of a path that would test his courage, challenge his heart, and prove once and for all that true worth is measured not by money, but by integrity. And so, with the weight of the journals on his shoulder and Lila's small hand in his, Samir walked away from the forgotten warehouse, ready to face the storm that awaited him. The days after visiting the warehouse were heavy with silence and thought. Samir carried the journals and files back to his small home, placing them on the kitchen table where he and Lila often ate their meals. Each evening, after finishing his long shift at the hardware store, he would sit down with a lamp burning low and open another folder. Page after page revealed shocking details. He read about secret accounts his siblings had opened, about deals that stole money from workers' pensions, about properties hidden under false names. The documents painted a picture of greed, corruption, and betrayal. Samir felt the weight of every sentence. It was not just about a broken family legacy. It was about hundreds of workers who depended on Arden Works for their survival. Fathers, mothers, and young people earned their wages there, never knowing their futures were being gambled away. Sometimes Samir would pause, close his eyes, and ask himself if he was strong enough to carry this responsibility. He remembered the laughter at the lawyer's office, the mocking voices that told him he was worth no more than a single dollar. Now he held the truth that could change everything. Leela often sat beside him while he worked through the papers. She drew pictures with her crayons, filling sheets with images of smiling people, tall buildings, and sunny skies. Every now and then, she would glance at her father and whisper, "You can fix it, Daddy. You're the good one." Her innocent faith gave Samir the courage to continue. He spent nights marking pages, organizing files, and creating a clear record of the evidence. He knew he could not act in haste. If he rushed, his siblings would deny everything. But if he was careful, if he prepared, the truth would be undeniable. Weeks turned into months. Samir's life became a balance between working his daily job, caring for Leela, and studying the documents late into the night. The burden grew heavier, but so did his resolve. He thought often of his father's letter. The words echoed in his mind, "Only you will use it to protect others, not to destroy." Samir understood now. His father had chosen him not for wealth, but for honesty. One rainy evening, as thunder rolled outside, Samir finally closed the last folder. The evidence was ready. He had gathered everything into one complete file. The fraud, the lies, the false contracts, all of it was clear. He leaned back in his chair and looked at Leela, who had fallen asleep at the table, her head resting on her arms. He whispered, "We're ready, Leela. It's time to face them." The next morning, Samir dressed in his cleanest shirt and folded the heavy file under his arm. He took Leela to a neighbor's house, thanking them for watching her, and then set out for the tall glass building where the company headquarters stood. The city buzzed with noise as he walked through the streets, but his mind was calm. This was the moment his father had prepared him for. Inside the headquarters, polished floors gleamed under bright lights. Samir walked with quiet steps to the top floor, where the office of Mr. Devlin, the company's CEO, was located. Years ago, Mr. Devlin had dismissed him as a failure, laughing along with his siblings. Today would be different. The secretary looked up as Samir entered. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. Samir's voice was steady. "Tell Mr. Devlin that Samir is here. He will want to see me." Moments later, the large doors opened, and Samir stepped inside. The office was vast, with tall windows overlooking the city. Mr. Devlin sat behind a polished desk, his expression one of mild annoyance. "Samir," he said with a smirk, "what brings you here? Looking for work, perhaps?" Samir walked to the desk without answering. He placed the file on the polished wood and looked straight into the CEO's eyes. His voice was calm but firm. "No," Samir said. "I'm here with the truth." Mr. Devlin raised an eyebrow and opened the file. As his eyes scanned the first few pages, the color drained from his face. He flipped through contracts, letters, and detailed notes. His hands began to tremble. Samir did not move. He stood tall, letting the weight of the evidence speak for itself. The silence in the room was broken only by the sound of papers turning. After a long pause, Samir leaned forward slightly. "Checkmate," he said softly. The words hung in the air like a final move in a long, quiet game. For the first time, the man who had mocked him now looked powerless. The burden of truth had been carried carefully, and now it rested on the desk between them, undeniable and unchecked. Samir had stepped into the role his father had believed he could fill. Not for revenge, not for wealth, but for justice. And though the battle was far from over, Samir knew he had taken the first step toward changing everything. The silence in the CEO's office stretched long after Samir's final word. Mr. Devlin sat frozen, staring at the pile of evidence. The smirk he had worn so confidently was gone. Every page he turned only deepened the truth. Fraud, lies, and betrayal had been exposed. Finally, he looked up at Samir, his voice trembling. "What do you want?" Samir took a slow breath. He had imagined this moment many times during the long nights of study, but now it was here. He felt only calm. "I don't want money," he said. "I don't want land or shares. I want something greater. I want protection for the workers. I want fair wages, honest treatment, and security for the families who depend on this company. That is the price of my silence. That is the future my father wanted." Mr. Devlin leaned back in his chair, the weight of the request pressing heavier than any demand for riches. This was not blackmail. This was honor. "And if I refuse?" he asked quietly. Samir met his gaze without fear. "Then I take this to the courts, to the newspapers, and to every worker who has ever been cheated. And when the truth spreads, there will be nothing left of this company but ashes." The CEO's face grew pale. He knew the evidence was undeniable. Slowly, he nodded. "You'll have what you want." From that day forward, changes swept through Arden Works. Contracts were rewritten, wages raised, and workers were given the rights they had long been denied. Samir kept no title for himself, no wealth from the empire his siblings had flaunted. Instead, he walked through the halls with quiet dignity, speaking directly to the employees, reminding them that honesty and fairness would guide the company from now on. The same people who once mocked him now looked at him with respect. They saw not a failure, but a man who had carried truth on his shoulders and chosen integrity over revenge. Months later, the company headquarters no longer echoed with whispers of corruption. Instead, laughter and pride filled the air as workers felt secure for the first time in years. Brent and Nora, once so loud in their arrogance, had fallen silent, their power stripped away by their own dishonesty. Samir never sought to humiliate them. He had learned that victory was not in crushing others, but in building what was right. His father's trust had not been wasted. In their modest home, Lila often asked questions about the journey. She would sit at the kitchen table where her father had once spread out the old journals, her small hands folded under her chin. "Daddy," she asked one evening, "what will we do with the dollar now?" Samir smiled gently. He reached into a small box and pulled out the faded bill, the very one that had begun it all. For a long moment, he looked at it, remembering the pain of that day in the lawyer's office and the laughter of his siblings. But now the memory no longer hurt. It was a reminder of how far they had come. "We will not hide it," he said. "We will give it meaning." And so he did something new. Instead of framing the dollar on the wall, Samir used it as the seed for a scholarship fund. He called it the $1 Trust. It was small at first, but soon others joined, moved by his story. The fund grew into a community project that offered children a chance to study, to dream, and to build futures brighter than their circumstances. The first scholarship certificate was framed above their kitchen table. It hung where the dollar once lay, a symbol that wealth is not measured by what you keep, but by what you give. Lila beamed with pride each time she saw it. "Grandpa was right," she whispered one night as Samir tucked her into bed. "He knew you would do the right thing." Samir kissed her forehead softly. "True worth," he said, "is not in riches. It is in love, in courage, and in the choices we make when the world doubts us." The story of the single dollar spread quietly through the city. People who once sneered now shared it as an example of hope and integrity. And in every worker's smile, in every child helped by the scholarship, the legacy of Samir's choice lived on. So when the world mocks you for what you don't have, remember Samir's story. Sometimes the smallest inheritance carries the greatest treasure, but only those with strong hearts can see it and choose to turn it into light for others. And so, from a single dollar came a legacy far greater than wealth. Remember, true worth is not measured by what you hold, but by the choices you make and the lives you touch. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring real-life stories.